Hello and welcome to Sevier Strategy, your automotive podcast. I'm your host, John Sevier.
And I am your co-host, Sarah Moore.
And today, I want to take a second before we get started and thank all of our listeners. You know, as we started this podcast, our goal is to deliver strong content to each and every one of you to be able to take away things you can implement into your dealership, actionable items, good information. And, you know, the response we've seen so far is definitely humbling. And I just want to take a second to tell everybody that's listening in how much we appreciate that. And again, today, we have another person who I consider a true automotive expert in the coaching realm, as well as some other pretty smart guy, is a good friend of mine by the name of Sean Kelley. Sean, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, John. Thank you guys for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for our listeners, Sean, that might not know you, I know I had the pleasure of meeting you quite a few years ago when you came out to help our dealer group at the time. You know, with coaching, and you went into one of our dealerships, our largest dealerships that have, you know, tons of sales managers. I mean, 40 salespeople plus. It's a big undertaking. And you came in, you did a phenomenal job with that. And I've seen the benefit of it. And that's why I wanted to have you kind of on the show today. But for our listeners that might not know who you are, can you give us a little bit of information, a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Thank you. My name is Sean Kelley, the CarBiz coach. I help automotive leaders achieve great results through people and technology. And I've spent the last 18 years or so on the showroom floor as both a salesperson, a finance manager, a used car manager, a GSM, and now the CarBiz coach. And we have dealers from coast to coast. We help dealers by essentially, we have a very unique way of developing people. And everything we do involves the leadership. And basically, it's all about coaching. So the industry, as we all know, there's a lot of training out there, but there's not a lot of people like myself, crazy enough like myself, to trade time for money and do coaching. But I help each individual where they want it, need it most, regardless of your position or tenure within your dealership. And essentially, we help in a few key areas, John. We customize the training for each rooftop. We also coach excellence into each member of the team. And we also help you with technology implementation and develop the culture of your business.
That's awesome. And I think one of the cool pieces about you, Sean, is that you are in and from the car business, right? So my previous background before I was in automotive was essentially in like the corporate America-esque type job. And, you know, there's a lot of great management training on, you know, how to do your job, how to be a leader, how to be a coach, all of this stuff. And, you know, from the car business perspective, when I got into the car business, you look for that, and it's still out there. There's still some great coaches, some motivators that are out there. But the cool part is someone with your experience and being that coach and mentor and everything that you do is you have that automotive experience, which I think is invaluable when you sit down, because a lot of times you talk to car dealers, their biggest gripe is, well, you don't know my business. You don't know what I do every day. It's different than, you know, working over here in this big office building downtown or corporate America, whatever it may be. And you have that unique perspective. And I think that's really important and cool. And I wanted to kind of point that out for you. But the reason I have you on the show today, Sean, is, again, I'm being selfish here because I wanted some help for both myself and our listeners. The previous episodes we've done, extremely beneficial, very informative, and a lot of good strategies for our listeners to take and implement into the dealership. But as you know, as anything, the hard part is actually implementing it and getting it, you know, done and taken care of and executing upon it. You know, I've said this before when I was talking with Steve Ressler in our previous podcast, video has been around now for a couple of years. We talk about video, we understand the importance of video, but it's always funny because I asked a couple of questions to dealers, and those questions are in specific order. Is, do you understand, you know, that video is a way to communicate with customers? The answer is yes. Do you agree that video is a progressive and a positive strategy, one that will result in more car sales for you if you implement it into your dealership? Yes. Okay. And then the third question, the big key one there is, are you doing it? And the answer is no. And a lot of times, I would like to say I'm shocked by that, but I'm not. The reason is because they don't know how to implement that in there. The salespeople are nervous about it. They don't know what to do or how to do it. And that's one of the big hurdles that I think we're not overcoming. And video is just one aspect of it. There's a ton of it. So if you can, kind of tell us, because change is never easy.
No.
In a dealership and anything, change is never easy, nor is it welcomed a lot of the time. So how, help us with, again, myself and our listeners, how do we go about getting these strategies we've talked about in previous podcasts implemented from your perspective?
Great question. And this is something that I wish it was as easy as saying, buy it and just tell them to do it, right? That would be perfect. But that's usually the strategy that most dealers or senior leadership try to implement when they buy a technology tool. And it could be anything, right? It could be video. It could be something like a phone script. I'll never forget, before I left my last dealer group, when I quit, we promoted 7 people under me that I'd been coaching up. One of the conversations I had with my dealer, he came to me and he said, Sean, I spent the whole weekend listening to our phone calls. He said, why is your store the only one using the phone scripts out of all 9 stores? And I thought about it, and I realized I was the only store that was coaching my team. So coaching is what will help you get total implementation. And what it boils down to, John, for anything to be implemented, the buy it and tell them to do it strategy just doesn't work. And that's because there are 6 barriers that you have to break through. I guess you could call them 6 layers of communication to make sure that someone will take action. To me, action is the highest form of communication. So I know when I had successful communication because someone will actually take action. They will execute. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So do you want?
So those 6 layers
That's right.
Are what are those 6 layers?
So first and foremost, I'm talking, but can you hear me? I just said, if you can't hear me,
Yes.
you won't be able to execute. Don't worry, guys. You're not.
I gotcha. Hey.
Right?
I was worried there for a second.
I was like, technical difficulties?
Guys,
Yes.
sorry,
So yes, I love
like
it,
that
Sean.
fun. You know that.
You had to. I got you.
sec-
For those listeners that are hearing on the podcast, if you want to see our faces and go wide-eyed there for a second, make sure you see this on YouTube. We post all of this content on there. But I appreciate that, Sean. So the first layer is listening.
That's right. And think about all the chaos on the showroom floor, right? If you're trying to implement something, roll it out, and you're trying to train on it or get people excited about it and half the people miss the meeting, then they didn't hear the message, right? Or if they're in a sales meeting and they're sitting there, playing on their Facebook page and not listening, or they're in training, then they didn't hear, and ultimately they won't be able to take action. That's simple. The next layer, let's say they can hear you, all right? Then the question becomes, are they listening? Because the average person talks about 140 words a minute. The problem is the brain processes 400 words a minute. So while people are thinking about what they're going to say next, if they're on the defensive or if they're thinking to themselves, this isn't going to work, then ultimately they won't be able to listen. And if they can't listen, then they cannot execute either. So that's layer 2. And if you think about it, how do we roll out technology, right? Is it done in a positive way? Are we selling it to the people in our dealership first? Or do we just say, hey, here's this tool we bought, now use it. And right off the bat, they're going into the defensive and it stresses them out. So they stop listening. So it's got to be done in the right, you got to get the buy-in. Okay. And then let's say they are listening and they hear, let's say they're actually hearing and they listen to everything you say. Then the question is, do they understand you? Sometimes we're speaking a different language coming from the management and there isn't clear expectations, and without clear expectations, people make up their own. So you have to really check for and ensure there's total understanding across the board. And then let's say they do understand. Then the question is do they agree with you? This is where comfort zones come into play. And people,
right.
We've been selling the same way for so long. We've been using a lot of the same tools and strategies for so long that it can be really hard to drive growth when people don't agree with it. So it's really important that you're checking for understanding, you're making sure they agree with you. And then that brings us to the next level of communication, which is really, do they have the ability to do it? You have to break through that barrier. And I think a lot of times we're really good in the CarBiz about telling someone how to drive a stick shift, but we don't show them how, and we don't observe them doing it or test them for competency to make sure they can, right? So do they really have the ability to do it? And because if they don't, John, and if you think about what happens if you're a BDC guru, right? So let's talk about an internet lead. Let's say I never get the ability to properly handle an internet lead. And let's say every time I work an internet lead, I call that customer up and I say something like, hey, do you want to buy a car? Do you want to come in for an appointment? And that's
wait, we don't say that?
I thought that was
not for best results.
Right.
So let's say I do that. What results will I see?
You're not going to see the results. If I'm not inspecting it, right? If I hear you saying, if I don't hear you in this situation, you're saying, hey, you want to buy a car? I'm not inspecting that.
So the results I see, just like you said, will be poor results. And what beliefs,
Absolutely.
What values will I start to develop about internet leads?
That they're worthless. I'm not seeing any results from it. So to me, and you're spot on here. To me, if I'm doing something incorrectly, I don't see value in it because I'm not seeing value in it. I'm not getting any kind of return.
100%.
So it's a waste of my time.
Not only do they need to have the ability to do the activity, like how do I push the button on the widget, okay? But they also need to understand, they need to have the ability with a powerful message that will give them the results that they'd want to get. Otherwise, they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And then leadership, think about this. We need to be consistently inspecting what we expect, listening to those messages, having coaching conversations to ask them, are you getting the results that you're hoping for from that activity? And if they're not, then that's a whole nother coaching conversation, coaching opportunity. So we've got to have the training up front. We've got, effective skill transfers, again, where we're telling them how, showing them how, observing them doing it. And then we've got to follow up, measure, check in, and support. And that is, again, where most dealers, a lot of businesses in general often drop the ball. And then finally, and we're still not to the end yet, we're almost to action, John, they have to want to do it. They have to really have a desire to do it because they know the value in it. They see what's in it for them or they're aligned to the direction of the company because, again, it was rolled out in the right way. And then they have to need to do it. Sometimes you have to set clear expectations and hold people accountable to it. They have to understand that this is going to be a requirement to be on the team. Otherwise, who's driving the bus?
And I could be wrong here, so please correct me if I'm wrong. When you and I have had these discussions before, one of the big things that I learned from you is the clear expectations. So the listening, all of that is important. I don't want to take away from that. But the biggest return I think I've ever seen in my department at the time was setting clear expectations. And it almost trickles into every one of those other layers. And it's really cool to see because, back to where you are in the example that you gave is I take this phone call and I do it incorrectly. When you set clear expectations, sometimes you get benefits in those other layers. So if I'm on the phone and I'm having a conversation and, I'm not doing what I should be doing, if I set those clear expectations and say, hey, you should be setting an appointment on, X amount of leads, right? Whatever your appointment percentage that you set for your team would be, and I'm not hitting those, a lot of times the agent who is motivated. I mean, a lot of times we just take it out on our employees when you realize they really do want to do better. They want to be good at their job. But when they have those clear expectations, then if I'm failing as a manager of not inspecting, right? Let's say I fall short in that layer. The good news is having those clear expectations, they come back to me and say, John, I realize you're supposed to be at this 25%, but I'm only at 10. I don't think that number is realistic. And what's beautiful there is I applaud them for bringing that concern up, and it allows us to have an open conversation of, oh, wait, you're doing this? Okay, that's the problem. That's the thing that we've got to fix. And, on the flip side of that, it's also created a culture where, our staff is much happier because they know what's expected of them. They know what they have to do in order to be successful at their job. They know exactly what they have to do in order to get a pay raise. They know all of that there, and I think it all stems from clear expectations. So that's one that I personally feel very strongly about, and I'm not saying that the other layers aren't important. Of course, action and listening and all of that's important, but for me, I would say that the biggest one that I've seen success with is the clear expectations.
It's a foundation on a house. If a house built on a foundation of sand will not stand. And that's the beauty of coaching, because in every conversation, you will break through every single one of those barriers, right? And at the end of the day, one of the most powerful things that a manager can leverage when it comes to implementation is all about understanding what each person on your team wants most. And could I share a coaching story, a coaching win on video when I was at my, when I was implementing coaching and video simultaneously at my dealership?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we had a Bosnian salesperson, great guy, phenomenal salesperson, and but he would not do video. He was totally against it. He's like, no, I look stupid. My accent dumb. People, and
you do that well.
And I know this fella since '05. We actually sold cars together on the showroom floor, and now I was the GSM of the store, and he was one of my top salespeople. But he would not do video, and to the point where the owner of our company was frustrated with him and stressed out with him, and the owner is shooting all over him. And what I mean by shooting all over him, I mean, you should do this. We told you to do this. You have to do. And he's like, no, I hate it. And he almost got fired because of just straight up saying, no, I won't do it. Okay. So instead of me yelling, telling, and selling to try to get him to do it, at this point, I'd become a coach. And I was like, you know what? I think I can coach this into his behavior. So I sat down with this fella, and I understood at this point what he wanted most in his career. And for him, he wanted to have a kid. He wanted time with his wife and family. And he also wanted to be able to be considered for a promotion at some point in the near future. So instead of sitting down with him and yelling, telling, and selling and shooting all over him, right, you should be doing this, I just said, hey, I'll call IT as his nickname. Hey, IT, what I want for you, okay, is to give you the free time with your family while also helping you make the money you want, okay, and also to make sure that you're available, that you can move up in this organization when the time comes. When's a good time to sit down and talk about some ways we can do that? And what do you think he said? Did he want to listen at that point?
Of course.
You talked about what was important to him.
And then I sat down with him and I said, IT, I want to help you do this, man. What's getting in the way of you doing videos? And so he's like, well, I don't like it. I look dumb on camera. And he starts sharing stuff with me. And I say, how could that affect you being able to move up in the company? And he's like, well, I imagine that, I make the owner angry. He won't let me get promoted. And I absolutely, I think you're right. And what about, if you were a manager, would you want your salespeople to do video if you knew that it worked? And he said, absolutely. I would, if it worked, I definitely want him to. And I was like, well, does it work? And he's like, well, I don't know. I was like, well, how could you find out if you don't shoot him? And he's like, that's a good, he goes, good question, right? Now, keep in mind, when you're asking questions, you don't want to be coercing people, all right? When I'm asking questions, I'm really seeking to understand. This is one of the hardest things for a sales manager to do because we're so used to trying to push our agenda and sell, right? When you're coaching, you need to detach from the outcome and seek to understand what's in their dome, because only by doing that can you be present, live in the moment, and get the real answers. And now instead of the shouldas, you should be, right? I'm not shooting on them. Now I'm focused on the future. I'm focused on action. So at the end of this conversation, I said, so IT, after this conversation, can you see how will video, I didn't say can you because that's loaded. I said, how will video help you sell more cars, right? Set you up for more sales, more appointments, and ultimately help you move towards your goals, right? And he said, well, number one, it's an expectation of the owner, and if I don't do it, I won't have a chance to move up. Number two, it'll help me get more engagement from internet leads, which will ultimately, I believe it'll probably lead to more sales. But if it doesn't, I can come to you and say, Sean, it isn't working. What am I doing wrong? And if we tweak it and it still doesn't work, I'll let him stop doing it, because I don't want to do something that isn't working, and I don't want him doing something that isn't working either. Right. But the only way to make sure we're not is to follow up and check on it, right? So then I asked him this: what are you going to do moving forward? He said, I'm going to send videos to every. I go, to who? He's like, every lead I have. I was like, perfect. When should I check in to make sure that's happening? He said, check in a week. I was like, perfect. And then I asked him, how should I approach you if you're failing to meet this commitment? And he said, just yell at me. I will do. So remember this saying, guys, if you're watching this now, I want you to remember the saying. You might want to get out your pen and write this down. If they build it,
I know
if
I will.
they own it, they act on it. No one calls their own baby ugly. Okay, so help them come up with the game plan themselves. Don't tell them what to do, because every time you do that, you're robbing them of their ability to problem solve, and you're taking away their autonomy, and you're making yourself into a crutch as a leader.
And I love how through that example, if they were truly listening into your 6 layers, it's amazing how each one of those layers you can pick exactly the part in that story that you talk about, the clear expectations, the outcome, the action, every bit of that. So I am extremely excited for our listeners to be able to listen to this podcast and take away that information. It's so crucial.
Yeah, and you've been able to kind of travel. You've done a lot of traveling, so I've been told, to and from, and you've really been coaching and teaching dealerships full time right now. What are some common things that you've come across where there have been points where you can coach, no matter where you were at in the country or even out of the country? Just some things that you've seen dealership to dealership that really has been a big topic for you to talk about.
That is a great question. Thank you. And when you say some traveling, this I'm just going to show you guys. This is my Apple Wallet.
Oh
And I don't
wow.
even put them all in there.
Wow.
I will say, so in the last 2 weeks, myself and my coaches worked out of 7 states, just to give you guys an example. And I'm flying to Toronto next week. Actually, we're kicking off a project up there. We're going to be on a show called the Total Dealership Makeover. So I'm really excited to be the coach and head coach and trainer on that project. So pretty exciting stuff. But one of the biggest challenges, if you look at the ability barrier, it's easy for anyone to say like, hey, let's get this tool and implement it. But, business isn't so easy and linear, right? So sometimes when you turn the blue dial, the red widget pops out, right? There's just things that happen. So I think it's really important that dealers look at, what's the time investment of trying to roll this tool out, and what else could suffer, and how much effort will go into it from the manager's standpoint, and how does this affect the employees and the other departments? It's really important to have a team meeting and discuss these things as a whole, and just get everything out in the open. And there's got to be open, honest, and candid communication, or those meetings just don't work. People, you got the one manager who's just trying to, kiss the rear end of the owner or something and say all the yes, everyone to death, right? You got the other manager who won't say anything for fear of getting reprimanded, and then the other managers like hate each other, so they start fighting. And anyway, so guys, I love every one of you. That's why I chose to stay in the automotive vertical and not move out. I wanted to help people in the showroom floor. So I think number one is having those open, facilitating those conversations, absolutely critical, to where you can really have a good understanding of the barriers to implementation of something like video, and come up with a game plan to address them prior to doing it. But one of the biggest barriers is simply time management. The average manager has 17 and a half hours a day worth of activities to do, is what I've found. So I think it's really important to figure out, how will they fit this into their day, and if they can't, what's the game? Who's the backup to them if they can't get it done? So I had a dealer group in Columbus, Ohio. I've been working with them for 2 years now, and the entire management team wanted monthly meetings with their dealer principal, but the dealer principal had about 65 hours a week worth of things to do, and so he couldn't get to them. So one of the things we had to do was really take inventory of his activities and his routine, and then figure out which of those things should we delete, delegate out, or defer. And we were able to free up over 20 hours a week from his schedule, in 3 or 4 coaching conversations. And now he not only has, it's really amazing, the store is doing the whole group's doing phenomenal. There's been internal growth, promotions, higher engagement percentages. We 6,000% increase in video utilization. And it was amazing, and pretty good stuff, right? And it all from the dealer principal buying back his time, being able to do the coaching, right? So he's working with the managers, and so not only doing monthly sales meetings, but bi-monthly one-on-ones with each manager on his team. It's made a massive impact.
That's great.
Well, I need to come to you for my professional and personal cutback
Absolutely.
time.
We can schedule a discovery call to see if coaching would make sense for you.
And I think everybody can see clearly just from the experience and the information you have of why we consider you an expert. Sean, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you share this information with us today.
My
One of
honor.
the things I want to ask you, it's like the elephant in the room, just because we've all been dealers, right? You've been in the shoes, you've done it yourself. Same here, same with Sarah. One of the things that comes up in conversations, it kills me. I don't agree with it, but it does come up. Is sometimes we talk to managers, we talk to owners, GMs, dealer principals, whoever it may be at the time, and you talk about coaching because I feel there was definitely some dealerships doing it. I'm not going to say all, but coaching in the car business didn't seem like they ever worked together, right? Or it was something that people talked about, if you go 10 years back. It just didn't seem like it was there or was a priority. It just wasn't even on the radar. And still, the people that are in the positions have been in those positions for that amount of time. And you speak with them and you talk about coaching in the car business. You talk about becoming a stronger leader and motivating and doing all of that. And it's been compared to what I'll tell you and to our listeners is from your standpoint, I consider a coach kind of like I do a psychic, right? I love the idea of a psychic. I want a psychic to work and tell me all the future and all the wonderful things I want to hear, but I don't necessarily believe that it's actually going to work. Now, I've worked with you. I've seen the results. I know that it works, but for, I guess I'll call the skeptics out there, what does success look like? I'm going to turn it back to you. We implement something in our dealership. Let's say we hire you, we hire somebody else, any kind of coaching, training or anything we can implement. We do that. What does success look like for us, Sean? What are some actionable items that I can count on happening by doing this? Is there really any? Is there, before I share my experience, what do you see? What does
That
success
is a great question. And this is really going to help our listeners understand the differences between training and coaching, right? Because if you look at any training platform, and by the way, I'm not anti-training. Training is, I think you have onboarding, training, and then coaching, right? So I think coaching is like the shiny car, right? But if I was going to tell you, like John, what's your favorite fast car?
Ooh, it's like asking me my favorite movie. How's somebody supposed to answer that question?
On the spot.
I know. I don't know that I could pick one. Let's see. I would say right now would probably be just because of working in the dealerships. I love the Ford Mustang.
Ford Mustang. Okay. So if I said we're going to improve the performance of this Ford Mustang, what part of it would you paint it? Would you put new rims on it? What would you do? Where would you have to work on that?
Well, I heard if you add flames down the side of the
faster.
Ford Mustang, I think it adds around 20 horsepower. So I'd probably start there, get some nice decals. And if I had neon lights underneath, that's probably another 200 horsepower if I throw that on there. If I remember correctly.
That's what most people in Cincinnati would probably do. No, I'm just joking.
No,
I'm just joking. No, bottom line, you'd work on the motor, you'd work on the engine,
right?
And that's what coaching does. You're zeroed in on the performance. But what you need to understand is that the engine in a person, in a human, is that's what drives them. That's what motivates them to take action. That's what drives behavioral change. So their engine is what they want most in their career. At the end of the day, you've got to, what is success? As a coach, it's not my agenda, it's theirs. As a trainer, it's, hey, I'm training you on how to close car deals. So my agenda is to help you close car deals using my training, right? As a coach, my agenda is whatever you want most. For instance, measurable coaching win. I had a GSM, one of the top Chrysler stores in the East Coast, that wanted to become part owner of his store. So he was recently, after 8 months of coaching, was just offered an ownership position. That's a measurable.
Wow. Yeah.
There's a Puerto Rican salesperson by the name of Melissa in New Jersey, Neptune, New Jersey, at a Nissan store that I've been working with. So she wanted to grow her business in the Hispanic community. So as a coach, I helped her come up with a game plan with that and helped be her accountability buddy, put action items into place, and then basically help support her by coaching her on an approach to her dealer to help him buy in and back her method for doing this, because they had some differentiating opinions, we could call it. So we coached her on that. Now, that was 4 months ago. All right. So this, from
Wow.
August 1st to August 20th was the last time I checked for this month for her. She had over 120. Actually, I think it was 131. It was 130 internet leads, self-generated from the Hispanic community in the last 90
That's
days.
awesome.
That's
Pretty
great.
amazing stuff, right? In the last 90 days, she's sold 21 cars off of this Hispanic community growth plan. And this is a direct result of, her executing on the action plan that we coached on. So did we achieve success in both cases, right? Helping someone become part owner, helping her with her Hispanic community growth plan, which is just getting started. Absolutely. But the success, how do I measure success? It's only when you get what you want out of your career, your business. The dealer I told you about buying back time. The other reason we needed to buy back time for him was so he could race ironically enough, race his Mustang. He's been doing 2 races a month now for the last 3 to 6 months or so. So it's really the
Wow.
success is the person I'm coaching. What's their engine? I want to make their engine faster. That's the difference there.
I think I'm so glad you shared that. I think that's a great example of what that is. And I'm glad you shared that aspect of it, because I think the simple answer there, which you didn't go for, which again, I appreciate, is, when your employees get what they want, when you have these type of discussions, you get a more motivated employee,
100%.
right? I think we all know, when you talk to car guys, if your salespeople are selling cars, right, and it's a busy showroom floor, they do better with car sales because they're happy, they're selling cars. Things are, they're working harder than they ever have before, versus, if it's dead on the showroom floor and there's nobody coming in, they're not as strong as they are when they've got 2 people that they're working with, or a busy Saturday or busy weekend or whatever it may be. And when you have that type of motivated employee that wants to better themselves, that wants to grow their career, like the Hispanic example right there of growing that community, she's selling more cars. Bottom line, if we don't say anything else, she sold more cars for herself and for the dealership. And I think that's really important to kind of to point out, is the motivation, the turnover rate's probably going to, be in a positive for you, instead of people just leaving because they're not getting what they want, or because you're trying to force change down their throat without actually having a conversation with them. Exactly how you said it. So, Sean, I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you have to leave right after this. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing the insights and information that you do. And for everybody else, the last thing I want to point out here is Sean sharing information. You hire a consultant sometimes, and they come into your dealership to help give you the information that they have and implement that change, and they charge a pretty penny for it. Same thing with coaching and hiring a coach in your dealership. They come in, they do a phenomenal job, and there is a charge for that because of the return that you get back. And for Sean to take his time today and to share the information that he has for not only myself, being selfish here, and this is why I enjoy having conversations with you, Sean, but for our listeners, is invaluable. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share.
Should I just bill you or split the bill between both of you? It's my honor.
Yeah, please.
The heftier amount goes to him.
It's my honor. And it's funny, John. I'd like to say one more thing which is simply yesterday I had just visited a dealer in Utah last week and did a site visit. Went over a proposal with him. So he texted me a few questions yesterday. One of which was, "Why should I invest in your company?" And my immediate response, which I sent via video for the record, was simply that I go, the answer to that question is, why should you invest in your people? Like, why should you?
I love it. That is a perfect
comeback.
I love it. Yeah. And of course, it's done by video. Shout out. Nice job, Sean. I practice what you preach there. So, great job.
Yes, and always thank you so much. Absolutely. And we want to.
I was just going to throw my email out there if anyone wants to reach out. It'd be awesome. Thanks, guys. They can reach me at Sean, SEAN, at carmotivators.com. Actually, it's in the background there. I don't know if they can see. So it's Sean, SEAN, at carmotivators.com, all one word. And it would be my honor to help any of you. Just reach out and I'll respond within 48 hours. And thank you guys for having me on the show. Sorry, man.
And you do have some good content out there. Sean's always sharing stuff on Facebook or LinkedIn. And for our listeners, it's a great way, just as a nice little tip here. Check him out, send him a request on Facebook, join him on LinkedIn. He's always putting good content out. At least start there, and let him prove to you. I mean, he's been extremely beneficial for us, but watch his content. You won't be disappointed.
Yes, reach out to him for sure. And also feel free to comment below our direct podcast there, and also our YouTube channel with any questions or topics that you want us to discuss. That way we can continue to bring that to you and have special guests on. Share and subscribe, and we hope to see you for our next upcoming episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.